Welcome back to Dead Reckoning, the Human Life Expectancy channel. In this video, we'll address the question, is evolution evolving? You may recall that in our last time together, we showed that the exponential growth in the human population must, and most likely will end as we simply choose to have fewer children. This might seem to be a small thing, but in the history of life on Earth, it is truly extraordinary. This choice is the dominance of our own volition over the tyranny of our genes, or volitional evolution, as biologists call it. This is an evolution of evolution itself that allows evolution to happen exponentially more quickly than it has in the past. Because understanding this is critical to forecasting how our lifespans and health might evolve in the future, in this video we'll show that over the eons, evolution has evolved from a slow process of natural selection to the coevolution of species, to sexual selection, and ultimately to the extraordinarily fast human-directed process known as volitional evolution, where human beings direct their own evolution and the evolution of other species. We'll also suggest that one of the first things we choose in volitional evolution will be to live longer, driving extended HLE going forward. So, let's take this step by step. First, some quick basic biology. You probably know that all living organisms are made of cells, which are basically little bags of water with walls made of membranes that allow food, water, and other necessary things to enter and waste to exit. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the code for each cell, carrying genetic instructions for the development, functioning, growth, and reproduction of all known organisms. It's a long chain made of 4 nucleotide bases, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, abbreviated A, C, G, and T, strung together in a double helix structure discovered by Watson and Crick in 1953. Since A's almost always pair with T's and C's almost always pair with G's, in cell replication, single strands of DNA unzip and find new complementary nucleotides. DNA is organized into sections called chromosomes that usually come in pairs that are stored in the nucleus of the cell. Cells with paired chromosomes are called diploid, and those like sperm and egg cells that contain unzipped chromosomes are called haploid. So, somewhere around 3.5 billion years ago, we think the earliest forms of life on Earth evolved. They were single-celled organisms where DNA was not contained in the nuclei. Today we call them prokaryotes, from Greek pro, meaning before, and karyon, meaning kernel or nut. And they constitute 2 of the 3 great branches of life, bacteria and archaebacteria. They reproduce asexually by essentially creating clones of themselves. They double their chromosomes and split in half, giving each daughter cell a copy of the same chromosomes as the parent. Under asexual reproduction, the primary means of introducing changes in heritable traits, or evolution, is gene mutation, where either the genes become damaged before the copying process, for example by radiation, or because something went wrong in the copying process itself. Either way, this is a random and very slow process. Then, about 1 to 1.2 billion years ago, during the Pleistocene epoch, a very strange thing happened. A single-celled organism essentially ate another, and instead of digesting it, the consumed cell was enslaved within the body of the master, resulting in a multicellular organism that, incredibly, managed to survive and reproduce. The astonishingly low likelihood of this outcome probably explains why it took over 2 billion years to occur. To allow this to happen, cells needed to have separate nuclei that contained DNA so that each cell could replicate individually. This gave rise to the 3rd major classification of organisms we have today. Life with cells that contain nuclei, which we call eukaryotes, or good kernels in Greek, and that reproduce sexually. Eukaryotes are divided into females that provide eggs and males that provide sperm necessary to fertilize them. As such, each organism contributes only half of their chromosomes to the next generation in a process biologists call genetic homologous recombination. In short, egg and sperm cells, each with a single set of haploid chromosomes, combine to produce an organism composed of cells with 2 diploid sets of chromosomes. The result is that the genes are shuffled every generation, resulting in a broader range of genes and a broader distribution in characteristics in the offspring. Today, almost all plants and animals we can see with our eyes are multicellular eukaryotes that reproduce sexually. Both sexual and asexual reproduction give rise to evolution through natural selection. In The Origin of Species, Darwin highlighted the primary role of natural selection in evolution. Natural selection, again, is the process whereby organisms better adapted to their environments tend to survive and produce more offspring. Since different characteristics tend to exist within any given population as a result of random gene mutation and other factors, characteristics inevitably result in greater or lesser abilities to survive and reproduce. As a result, evolution occurs as certain characteristics become more common or rare within a population. Sexual reproduction accelerates the pace of evolution, as a broader range of characteristics resulting from the shuffling of the genes of the parents compete to be passed on to future generations. While some variations are helpful and some are harmful, the broader range allows for more of the helpful ones to be propagated, accelerating the pace of evolution. The shuffling of genes also has the benefit of impeding harmful accumulation of genetic mutations that occurs in populations that reproduce asexually. This advantage, however, comes at a big cost when compared to asexual reproduction. Gametes, both sperm and eggs, have to meet at the right time and at the right place to form another organism. And this is always going to be harder than splitting single cells, as in asexual reproduction. For example, not only do we humans have to find and select mates, a process that can consume much of our early adult lives, but human gametes must compete numerous highly improbable processes to be created, ripened, transported to find each other, and joined and gestate to become a new human baby. From a biological perspective, this process is wasteful, inefficient, and it simply doesn't work for many people who want to become parents. This creates the need to revolutionize human reproduction, which we'll discuss in a future video. Most importantly for our purposes now, there's strong evidence that sexual reproduction greatly enhanced the speed of evolution. It's resulted in the explosion of multicellular animals about 600 million years ago and led to the appearance of Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago. Evolution then evolved further. As evolution proceeded and species became more complex, some of them co-evolved by selecting for changes which favored the propagation of their genes. Of course, there was no conscious choice being made by these plants and animals, yet they exhibited powerful evolutionary pressures that further accelerated evolution. One excellent example of this is the coevolution of flowers and insects. In his book, The Greatest Show on Earth, biologist Richard Dawkins describes how, quote, all brightly colored flowers owed their very existence to insects. In short, initially flowers reproduced by disseminating their pollen to the winds. This was wildly inefficient because the likelihood of the pollen, the male plant gamete, randomly blowing into the ovum, the female plant gamete, was very low. Over eons, plants evolved flowers that attracted insects which gather pollen and transfer it to other similar plants. This was an enormously more efficient way to reproduce. Dawkins writes, for the flower, insect pollination represents a huge advance in the economy over the wasteful scattergun of wind pollination. Generations of ancestral flowers were chosen by generations of ancestral insects and hummingbirds or other natural pollinators. Plants evolved male features which selected for specific insects that could best transfer their pollen to female parts of the same species. Insects evolved means of harvesting nectar from flowers and transporting their pollen. Each side could be said to have domesticated the other, selectively breeding them to do a better job than they previously did. By this process, birds have selectively bred insects to be unpalatable, threatening, or even venomous by eating the most desirable insects. Similarly, dogs likely began to self-domesticate as wolves ran into human populations. They found readily available food scraps, which made it easier for them to survive. However, to access those scraps, they needed to be less scared of humans. Those that were less scared got more food and had more offspring. Soon, the wolves had evolved into village dogs without any human intervention. Then, evolution took another leap forward. As species evolved and became still more complex, selection of a mate became more than random bumping together of organisms, and sexes began to prefer traits in individual members of the opposite sex. As a result, natural selection, arising from competition for survival and shaping organisms to their environment, evolved into what evolutionary biologists call sexual selection, arising from the competition or reproduction and shaping of organisms to the preferences of their mates, further accelerating evolution. It's not just characteristics that lead to long-term survival that top the list, but those that the opposite sex find most compelling. And what might those be? While the answers are species-specific, capricious, and widely varied, novelty seems to reign. As with humans purchasing consumer products, species seem to be on the lookout for new characteristics and things that one potential mate has that others don't. The idea that mate choice could drive evolution actually came directly from Darwin himself and was unprecedented. He viewed novelty-seeking sexual selection as an irrepressible force that could account for rapid evolution of sexual ornaments. In animals where females choose which males to mate with, for example, mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and most insects, they often select for a broad range of specific traits such as size, color, or even behaviors such as displays. But there can be a problem with sexual selection. At least with natural selection, characteristics were selected based on their ability to assist survival. This is not so with sexual selection. The characteristics that determine mating success might be different from those that would cause an organism to live longer. This is what biologists call antagonistic pleiotrophy, where organisms evolve to reproductive success at the expense of their individual long-term survival. As a result, sexual selection has resulted in some strange and unviable species. Through sexual selection, Irish elk evolved antlers that were dysfunctionally large. The female of the species began selecting male deer based on the size of their antlers, and apparently bigger was better. Over generations, this led to larger and larger antlers on male elk, so much so that they couldn't escape men or other predators. Eventually, the Irish elk came to stand almost 7 feet tall at the shoulders and carry the largest antlers of any known deer, a maximum of 12 feet from tip to tip, and weighing almost 90 pounds and requiring significant energy to carry around. This maladaptation ultimately resulted in the extinction of the species. As another example, the peacock's long, showy tails and displays that also evolved out of sexual selection clearly reduce their maneuverability and make it difficult for them to fly, making them more vulnerable to predators. Narwhals have a canine tooth that evolved into a long, spiraling horn in the males that offers little advantage except for its role in sexual selection. In case you doubt how broad a spectrum of characteristics and behaviors can be driven by sexual selection, consider the bowerbird that spends considerable time and energy building purely aesthetic displays to attract mates. They carefully construct avenue-type bowers made of 2 walls of vertically placed sticks which allow the female to observe the male and his courtship dance, while allowing the female to escape if she so pleases. In and around the bower, the male places a variety of brightly colored objects he's collected. These objects, usually different among each species, may include hundreds of shells, leaves, flowers, feathers, stones, berries, and even discarded plastic items, coins, nails, rifle shells, or pieces of glass to match the preferences of females. In humans, evolutionary biologists now largely agree that sexual selection created distinct differences between men and women. Sexual selection by females led to males that were taller and heavier, with more body strength and higher metabolic rates. Men were also selected to have beards and penises that were much longer, thicker, and more flexible than those of other primates. The sexual selection of human males led to females with enlarged breasts and buttocks, narrow waists, and greater orgasmic capabilities than other apes. In addition, sexual selection is thought to have led directly to the development of human intelligence. In 2000, evolutionary psychologist Geoffrey Miller wrote, "Our minds are entertaining, intelligent, creative, and articulate far beyond the demands of surviving the plains on the Pleistocene Africa. To me, this points to the work of some intelligent force and some active designer. However, I think the active designers were our own ancestors, using their powers of sexual selection to influence, unconsciously, what kind of offspring they produced. By intelligently choosing their sexual partners for their mental abilities, our ancestors became the intelligent force behind the human mind's evolution. Jeffrey Miller proposes that our minds evolved not just as survival machines, but as courtship machines. Once language had evolved, thought itself became the subject of sexual selection. While transferring information for survival's sake, for example through warning signals, absolutely helps individual species to avoid predation through natural selection, information that allows us to woo a mate offers a direct path for our genes to propagate and partake in the eternal. He points out that every one of our ancestors managed not just to live for a while, but to convince at least one sexual partner to have enough sex to produce offspring, which can take several months. This shifts our survival-centered view of evolution to a courtship-centered view, and helps many aspects of human intelligence to make more evolutionary sense. After all, what do music, art, wit, humor, poetry, and ornate language have to do with competition for survival? How could these traits have evolved? Evolutionary biologists have struggled to make a compelling case, especially since the vast majority of animals thrive on relatively tiny brains. However, anyone who's ever dated can attest to the characteristics that are useful in attracting mates, and attracting mates is directly linked to evolution. Viewing our minds as courtship machines also helped to explain another great mystery of human evolution. From the perspective of natural selection, it's been difficult to explain the archaeological fact that our brains grew from 1 pound about 2 million years ago to 3 pounds only about 100,000 years ago, while our societies and our technologies remained largely unchanged. Our enlarged brains seem to make us no better at making stone tools or competing against other species for survival. Our brains are so complex and costly to grow and to maintain that they must have arisen to serve some compelling evolutionary advantage. Exactly what were we using our minds for, if not to transform our scientific knowledge, technologies, or societies? Like bowerbirds, we evolved whatever characteristics our mates fancied, and the ability to be attentive, to speak and convey ideas and emotions topped the list. In this way, it could be said that the pursuit of beauty, joy, or simple stimulation may have led to the highly unique characteristics that seem either unrelated or downright dysfunctional from a survival standpoint, such as art, culture, humor, wit, and many of the other characteristics that are so uniquely human. The uniqueness of human intelligence and the fact that it evolved quickly also support the notion that it arose from sexual selection versus natural selection. Adaptations with large survival benefits, so for example eyes for seeing, typically evolve slowly and separately many times across multiple species. Biologists call this convergent evolution. In contrast, adaptations that evolve from sexual selection tend to occur quickly and be limited because they're driven by the whims and the preferences of potential mates. The facts that our brains evolved quickly by evolutionary standards, and there's scant evidence of human-level language, humor, philosophy, or art in other species, supports the notion that our brains evolved from sexual selection. This also explains why we spend so much time thinking about sex. It's what our brains evolved to do. Studies consistently show that men think about sex about 19 times a day on average, and women think about sex about 10 times a day on average. It also explains numerous aspects of human behavior involving display, physical competition, status and image, such as rock star performances, sports, consumption of luxury goods, thirst for money and power, and the tendency to become more rebellious after puberty. Human intelligence happened to show large survival advantage only long after it evolved through sexual selection. It was only in the last 100,000 years that we learned to apply the uniquely human capabilities we selected for in our mates to science, technology, and society, resulting in our exponential growth and the dominant position we hold today. For comparison, human tool-making in society remained largely unchanged until about 40,000 years ago, and agriculture began only about 20,000 years ago. However, it remains to be seen whether our sexually selected intelligence ultimately proves to be humanity's unique success, a maladaptation that will lead to our demise, like the Irish elk, or perhaps both. Whatever the ultimate outcome, the current imperative is clearly to use our intelligence to better manage and curate the evolution of humans and other species. This is what we call volitional evolution. In our next video, we'll show how volitional evolution has allowed us to increasingly control and accelerate the pace of evolution. In the meantime, please hit the like button below, subscribe to the Human Life Expectancy channel to make sure you don't miss our next videos, and post comments for the topics you'd like to have us cover. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, as we say at Human Life Expectancy Inc., hi hua! Please, do what you can to help yourself and help us all to live longer.